Hey, you can see me at MomoCon 2025, information in the description.
Oh, hey you. What's up? I was just getting groceries and... Hey, what are you looking at? Shit. Okay, so full disclosure, I was not expecting the home video to take off at all. I thought that baby was gonna sink into the ocean like my hopes and dreams. It was not a topic I had any faith in that it would do well, but... Damn, no, you guys, you really seem to like that one, huh? Well, hey, fine by me, cause, I'm not gonna lie, I always wanted this to be the video topic from the beginning. Yeah, I know, story of my life at this point, but I originally meant for the home video to be a section in this overall ranking of Dreamworks adaptations. It's just that, you know, I'm very bad at planning things out, and my ADHD decides to stop being an issue for the most random possible topics, so I ended up making that deep dive instead and throwing this to the wayside for longer than I intended. But look, I'm doing it now. It's like there was no delay at all, only 6 months. So let me tell you about Dreamworks and their list of adaptations, which you might be shocked to learn there's actually way more of than you'd probably expect. I mean, I'm guessing we all know about the obvious ones, Captain Underpants, Wild Robot, I guess Home now if my views are anything to go by and I want to have a big head, but if you really take a look at Dreamworks' catalog, including the stuff that's been loosely adapted, you could legit make a case for how almost half of their films are technically adaptations. Even more than that if you count Jeffrey Katzenberg adapting Disney's ideas when making Ants. But really, they've gotten a lot of inspiration from outside sources, and not just the typical kids book, fairy tales, or public domain kind of stories Disney pulls from either. No, they've also adapted toys, newspaper comics, 60s cartoon segments, a 2,000-year-old Middle Eastern religious text called the Beyblade, sorry, I'm not French, I probably butchered that, but you get what I'm saying. They're very experimental with what they choose to base their movies on, and I find it really interesting because much like how Dreamworks as a company is sort of known for modernizing the animation scene Disney set after trying to copy them, their adaptations kind of follow a similar pattern where at first they stuck closer to classic stories and old folktales before moving on to more contemporary stuff that was actually made within the century. Is that discrepancy gonna reflect how I rank them? There's only one way to find out. This is every Dreamworks adaptation ranked from worst to best. Oh, but first of all, I should clarify what I consider an adaptation, seeing as if I just let everything that said it was based on something else be in this, half of the list would be at the bottom for having almost no resemblance. So the main things I kept in mind before making this was 1, if they're based on a basic picture book with nothing to say, that's not enough, so no Boss Baby or Orion in the Dark. 2, if they only adapt the main characters without the setting, that's not enough, so no Shrek or the bad guys. 3, if it's based on something that's really hard to judge as an adaptation, it's out, so no Over the Hedge or Trolls. And 4, if it's just going for something completely different from the source, it's out, so no How to Train Your Dragon or Rise of the Guardians. I know that sounds harsh and like I'm excluding a lot of potential candidates, but keep in mind, for this ranking, I wanted specifically to talk about films that, in one way or another, were trying to be adaptations. So with that in mind, I've narrowed it down to 8 films. And since this is going from worst to best, you should know there's only one way to start it off. Oh my god, I can't believe it. The movie I made a video on saying it was bad happened to be the worst in this list. How could it be? This is so shocking. Alright, I'll stop. But yeah, you already know what I think about this movie, how it's a poor imitation of a great book that actively sands down the edges of its serious story to be about Bing Bing Bazinga alien coming to make friends with Rihanna, so there's not really a whole lot I can add that I haven't said already. If you want a more in-depth opinion, you got a pretty good resource for figuring out my thoughts on the thing. But if I could just add one more thought after watching through all these films to figure out how Dreamworks tends to handle these, it's that regardless of the quality of the next 7 films, and trust me when I say this, most of them are very good, there's something about them all that Home inherently seems to lack. Appreciation. Every other film in this video, no matter how much I liked or hated them, felt like they were made with appreciation for the source at least a little bit. And as they should, right? After all, why would you want to make an adaptation of something if you don't respect the thing you're adapting? No, but seriously, why? Why would you do that? And listen, I'm not saying the people who worked on Home didn't appreciate the true meaning of Smek Day. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that however it ended up the way it did, whatever executive meddling, or poor creative control, or upper breast censoring, or alien abduction led to Home becoming what it is, This, as a film, has no respect for Smekte. There's not a single bit that hints at any love or passion or attention to detail for what Smekte was doing. And with just how great most of the films I'm about to talk about are at doing those exact things, it really just makes me respect Home that much less for the corporately mandated piece of shit that it is. I salt the earth this film was grown on. May it never cook ever again for all our sakes. That being said, Towards the Sun is way too good of a song to be off that film's soundtrack. Like, what? You're telling me that was made for Home?
It's a sick world we're living in. Sick people.
Sinbad is... sin-decent. Yeah, I knew you liked that one. Yeah. yeah.
Kill your shit.
No, but for real, as far as movies just, well, in general go, Sinbad is probably somewhere near the very middle of the spectrum. It is a perfectly fine action-adventure film, totally serviceable on its own. If I was just watching it as a film, I'd say it's a pure 5.5 out of 10 with a couple highlights. But we're not talking about it as just a film now, are we? No, we're talking about it as an adaptation. And on that front, I gotta tell you that this is some bullshit. If this movie is a Sinbad adaptation, then fuck, my middle school's take on A Midsummer Night's Dream, where we just played out a few random scenes because kids kept forgetting their lines and we didn't have enough people to do the whole thing, was a goddamn thespian performance. Okay, I know I sound disproportionately angry for a film that I just got done explaining was mid, but you don't understand the situation I'm in here. See, when I was planning out this entire video, Sinbad was the only one I hadn't seen before, so when I looked at interviews saying it was a mix between the Arabian folktale and Greek mythology, I took them at their word, and so read the entire 7 voyages of Sinbad first in its original English text, which was not easy given it was written like old Shakespeare, only to find out that this film is basically a stripped down version of the Odyssey with Brad Pitt and a Sinbad texture pack slapped on top. It's got Greek threats like sirens for half of the obstacles, it's got the Greek goddess Eris from the Iliad as the main villain, it's got none of the characters or plot elements from the old Sinbad stories, hell, it's not even set in Iraq anymore, which I guess I should have figured with this coming out in post 9/11 America and all, where they couldn't even show an explosion in film without censoring it to be something else, but still, what's even the point of calling it Sinbad if you're not gonna make it a Sinbad story? Oh, you put in an island-shaped fish halfway through, something that's mentioned for a single line near the start of the first voyage? Oh, times 2? You included a rook from the second voyage that's basically a fucking Arcticuno more than it is a rook? My girl, what a deep cut, you guys! You're really spoiling people who know the old stories here. I mean, come on, you made me read classic literature for this? I could have been spending more time reading Captain Underpants books, but no, I had to read a story where Sinbad isn't a swashbuckling pirate, doesn't have a loyal crew, love interest, or gay prince lover, and presumably isn't making the Dreamworks face every 5 seconds with the exaggerated swagger of a black teen. What even is my goddamn life anymore if this shot of Sinbad's exposed ass cheek transitioning into the moon isn't canon? Next you're gonna tell me the funny wizards from Prince of Egypt weren't there. But yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself with that. It's just I don't have that much to say about this as an adaptation since it's very clearly not trying to be Sinbad. There's not really even that much of a case to be made about how they differ in interesting ways, since it would pretty much just be me listing all the things they don't have in common, which, yes, in case you were wondering, is a lot. Honestly, I'm mostly just keeping it in out of spite for making me waste my time like that. Though I do also like the fact I can say this is still a better adaptation than Home, purely because it doesn't spit on the source and grind it into the ground like Helmeppo in One Piece. Sometimes I make the references just for me.
This is bullshit. This is an outrage. I am into fat bitches.
Bet you didn't know this was an adaptation. Or maybe you did, and right now you're typing a lengthy comment about how ignorant I am, but my point is, this isn't exactly what you tend to think of when someone's talking adaptations, but it does definitely count as a remake of the 60s Rocky and Bullwinkle shorts Peabody's Improbable History. And when it comes to adapting those shorts for a big screen release, it's okay, I guess. Like, it's not the worst way these shorts could be adapted, and I do think the people making this wanted to do a good Peabody film, but most of its connections to the show feel vague at best and kind of obligatory at worst. See, the original idea behind Peabody was that him and his son Sherman would go on adventures to the past where they came across either weird or famous historical figures with strange problems who they then needed to help within a 5-minute time slot. Now, because they were so short, they didn't have the time to do anything too elaborate, and because they were TV animation in the 60s, they didn't really have the budget for it either, so instead of focusing on spectacle, Peabody mostly relied on clever writing and fun characters, having a lot of dialogue and not a lot of anything else. But it worked, since the writing really was smart, and for something made in the 60s, I gotta tell you, it was pretty self-aware of what it was and loved to crack jokes about it, like how Peabody's always making all these intentionally bad puns.
Taxes? Wow, that is a big problem.
Of course, Sherman. We all know that everything is big in Texas.
It never fails to amaze me how you can stand there and say such corny things with such a straight face.
You know, it's shocking to see a series from so long ago that's still really sharp today without relying on something more universal like slapstick, and I think that's a testament to just how good the Rocky and Bullwinkle writers were. They knew exactly how to work within their limits to make super fun TV without a theatrical budget, and that's probably why the movie differs so much in what they care about, seeing as given this is quite literally a theatrical film, it's got a big theatrical budget, over 140 million. So how do they put all that extra money to work? Well, by upping the spectacle. A lot. Now, every couple of minutes, there's a new chase, or a fight scene, or a set piece where something goes boom and the whole screen explodes into a million little pieces, but there's not nearly as much room to just have the simple antics that Peabody was known for. At best, about halfway through, we get them going to Sicily to help Leonardo da Vinci make the Mona Lisa smile for her painting, which is pretty in line with the type of stuff the shorts would do, but even then, it's resolved in around a minute flat, and there's not really anything all that clever about it. It's just Peabody fails to do something funny, he's funny on accident, conflict resolved. It's literally finished faster than most of the shorts because it's just that basic. Meanwhile, in the shorts themselves, they'd have solutions like, to find a needle in a haystack, just sit down, or the best way to make it rain is to try and have a picnic. The kind of stuff I'd almost call wayside gags for how much it reminds me of Wayside School, except instead of the joke answers being intentionally backwards, they actually make sense while also being a punchline. But we don't really get too many of those types of jokes in this, since it's so busy trying to be a mix between every time travel movie you've ever seen and a weird allegory for dog gay adoption homophobia. Yeah, there are a few ways you'd probably expect this movie to go, and for the most part it checks off all the boxes: cast running through big events, meeting famous people, accidentally bringing them to the present, all that good stuff. But one thing you probably wouldn't predict is Sherman and Mr. Peabody's father-son relationship being a metaphor for gay parents, or having the main conflict be about Sherman biting a girl after she calls him a dog, and Mr. Peabody needing to prove he's a suitable parent to a bigot correctional officer. Like, I'm not trying to say this is a bad idea for a story or anything, it's just that I'd never expected to be the conflict for a Peabody movie in between all the time travel shit. Am I weird for thinking that? Am I weird for believing a movie based around a boy and a dog fixing wacky historical problems is a bit odd to have a gay adoption metaphor in there? I mean, to be fair, I guess it's the most memorable part of the movie. It's definitely the thing that stuck with me the most over the several times I've watched it growing up, but then again, I think that's mostly just because the actual time travel shenanigans, you know, the selling point of the movie, are fucking boring as hell, dude. They are so generic and dull and played out to the point almost any scene in this movie involving time travel, you can trace back to another film or book that did it better. Granted, it's not all bad or played out. The Anubis scene is still pretty funny, and the beautiful boy scene still gets me emotional whenever I see it, but all around there's just this ever-looming cloud of Simpsons did it across the thing that I can't stop hearing no matter how hard I try, which is especially bad for a premise like Peabody and Sherman, where their whole thing was mixing history with creativity. They weren't just visiting real events that were playing out as usual, they were helping solve wacky problems to make it so those events happened at all. That was something they just got with the Mona Lisa scene and then nowhere else in the entire movie. It's why I said a lot of the nods to the shorts almost feel a bit obligatory, since half the time it doesn't even feel like they wanted to make them. They just did them because they had to. Then for the other half, they either did it really well, like with Peabody's stupid puns, which are perfectly done and have just the right level of self-awareness, or they just missed the mark by 1,000 yards, like with Peabody's intelligence, which has gone from being based on common sense and logic to that one 4chan post about Sherlock on how dumb people write smart characters, where instead of their reasoning being based on deduction, they're like, and so Sherlock threw peanuts at a guy, making him go into anaphylactic shock as he deduced from a dartboard with a picture of George Washington Carver on it that the man had a severe peanut allergy. I mean, I won't say it isn't fun to write smart characters like this, but still, it just completely misses the mark on what made his simple but funny solutions so good in the first place. Same's true for Peabody and Sherman's relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, they totally get their dynamic down, and their father-son relationship is 100% the whole heart of the thing, even if the conflict of Peabody thinks Sherman is ashamed to be a dog could have easily been solved if instead of him saying, "I bit her because she called me a dog," he said, "I bit her because she threw my lunch to the ground, stole my stuff, and put me in a headlock." talk, but hey, that's just me talking. When it comes to their relationship stuff, it's perfectly fine when it's just the two of them. Unfortunately, though, there's usually someone else tagging along to fuck their dynamic up. And that's the girl Sherman bit, who's a perpetual piece of shit that causes every single problem so the two of them can save her, Penny. I do not like Penny, if that wasn't clear. I think she's an annoying brat. And look, I get that you're supposed to think of her as that at the start and come to like her over the course of the movie as we spend more time with her, but that's just the thing, you see. I don't come to like her. She's an annoying brat at the start and an annoying brat at the end. The only difference is that by the end, she's able to admit it.
I'm a dog too.
Well, Penny, I'm not sure if you're a dog, but you're clearly a bitch. Ah, Braxton, you can't say that. She's just a child. Yeah, a child whose defining moment of being more than she seems is getting Sherman out of his comfort zone and believing in him by letting go of the controls of a flying machine and forcing him to take it before they crash. Man, what a great motivator. How touching. That'd be like me being a terrible friend to someone, but then I'm like, listen, buddy, I just want to let you know that I believe in you. Now cut the wire already, or we're all gonna fucking die. I believe you can save us. But seriously, she is just awful. And it doesn't help that she's also Sherman's love interest when, and could you take this away from me, Mr. Peabody?
He's 7.
That's right, Sherman is 7 years old. Are we really so brain-rotted as a culture we need to have even the 7-year-olds getting in toxic relationships for us to be invested? Isn't that a little bit young? Like, I could take it if it was a Ponyo thing, where it was just pure wholesomeness the whole time, but this is weird. She had him in a chokehold telling him to beg. That might be a little bit much, you guys. And for the record, when I say that, I do mean her entire character. Legit, I would have liked this movie way more if she was just not in it. And to those saying she's the main driving force of the conflict, I am aware. That's the problem. Still though, I wouldn't quite call this a bad adaptation, just a misguided one. And you'll probably be thankful to know that this is the last Dreamworks adaptation I'd call less than good. So it is nothing but way up from here.
This is not real. It's just a dream.
Bet you didn't think about this as an adaptation. Wait, didn't you already do this introduction? Ah, but it's in a different context this time. See, with the Peabody section, I was highlighting that no one really thinks of it as an adaptation. Whereas with this, I'm highlighting that most people aren't even aware it exists, period, let alone that it's eligible for this video. But it is. Sure, it might not be a theatrical film. In fact, it's the only Dreamworks movie ever made and released on DVD, presumably to cash in on that Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 hype Disney was peddling at the time. But unlike most Disney direct-to-DVD sequels, this has the distinction of actually being a decent movie, and for a spiritual prequel to The Prince of Egypt, no less. I mean, by all accounts, this should be a total steaming pile of holy shit, but it surprisingly isn't, and I'm saying that both as a film and as an adaptation. Not that I call it a masterpiece or anything, there's really only so good a film can get when it's on a direct-to-video budget, and that restriction does come through in a couple key areas, mainly the songs, which are extremely forgettable and bland, but still, for something that's relegated to family movie night at your uptight Christian private school, this goes way harder than it has any right to. I'm talking maybe a 6 out of 10 here, guys. It's insane. And they didn't even have to change too much about the Bible story it's based on to make it good. Well, I guess they did have to cut out the bit about God killing a guy for pulling out to not get a girl pregnant, but aside from that, it's surprisingly pretty faithful and even elevates its material sometimes when the moment calls for it. I think a big part of what helps is that as a direct-to-video film, instead of trying to match the heights of Prince of Egypt, like, say, Hunchback 2 did, trying to copy that movie's spectacle and failing miserably, it goes for a comparatively smaller story to keep it from stretching its resources too thin. And so as a result, it leads to a film that knows what it is and doesn't go too far in places where it knows it can't, but still leaves enough room to do something fun or big every so often, like during the actual dream sequences. You see, the whole story is about this guy who can interpret dreams and uses it to rise through Egypt after his brothers sell him to slaves for being too much of a whimsy boy, so needless to say, the dreams themselves play a pretty large role in the story, and the animators definitely kept that in mind, since they put a whole lot of effort into making these look about as good as a cheap year 2000 CG dream sequence possibly could, which, okay, admittedly isn't the greatest, and these do have so much crust to them you can practically scratch it off the screen with your finger, but the style shines through enough for me to forgive them. Like, I can tell they were really trying with these whenever they had the chance, and the rest of the movie also looks... Well, honey, you'll always have your personality. Alright, that's a bit harsh. It doesn't look terrible. There's clearly a lot of ambition here for something so small in scale that didn't have to try nearly as much as it did. It's just that you can tell this was meant to be shown through a CRT display on a standard def TV. The people who made this probably never expected you to see it in such a high resolution. In fact, I think they were kind of counting on it. And that comes through in how everything's just a little bit clunkier than you can get away with now. Like, ooh, nice walk cycle there. Nice facial expression. Nice... Ugh, I don't even know what that was, but I know I wasn't supposed to see it that way. There's just a certain level of polish that's missing when they're not going for big moments like the dream scenes, and hey, it works out okay for the most part, seeing as, like I said, this is small enough in scale that the characters and story drive it more than the art, but it does still get distracting from time to time, and also, I'm not gonna lie, I just don't like cheap digital coloring from this era. Like, I get it was a new technology and people were sort of just trying things out to see if they could, but I've always thought this specific brand of airbrush shading looked kinda ugly, and Joseph leans into it very hard. It's basically the visual equivalent of anti-ASMR for me, like it's actively trying to get me to look away from it, which I really don't want to do since the actual narrative is pretty engaging. I like Joseph as a character. I like how he has an actual personality and struggles with his identity after losing everything instead of just being God's golden boy the whole time like he is in the original. He's got a serious character arc here, and it's cool to see him build up his confidence over time while slowly finding himself, only for it to come back into question when he runs into his brothers again years later. On the writing side, this is a very good adaptation that makes simple but satisfying changes to lift up its story. I just wish I could watch it without my brain telling me, wow, I'm suddenly getting the urge to ask for some rupees, my boy. Honestly, this script is way too good for the production budget it got, but as long as you can get over the early 2000s direct-to-DVD crust, I would still recommend it whether you're a fan of the original Bible story or not. I know I mostly spent this section bitching about the animation instead of building up the good of the writing, but that's just cause by far, this is the most standard adaptation that Dreamworks has ever made. It adapts the story, it adds a few things that make it better, it works exactly how it should and a little bit more, it just doesn't work in a particularly interesting way, so I didn't have much to say about it. But it's good, you should watch it. If you want to know where to find it, just check out the bottom of the bargain bin at your local Target. Trust me, it's down there somewhere. Alright, now we're getting to the start of the real bangers. Dogman. This is probably the one you were waiting for me to talk about, you goddamn Gen Alphas, and you better believe that I am ready to pander. And it's not even gonna be hard since I genuinely love this movie and think it's a pretty good adaptation, if with a couple of flaws that were kinda expected given the books it's based on. You know, I'd kinda compare it to something like Lolita. Let me explain. What I mean is that in Lolita, we're following it from the unreliable narrative of Humbert Humbert, a man who preys on a woman's 12-year-old daughter, and in Dogman, we're reading it as an in-universe comic book written by George and Harold from Captain Underpants. You see what I'm getting at now? They're basically the same, kinda, in that the whole appeal comes from how it looks and reads like it was written through the eyes of a specific person, in this case, a pair of 4th graders. Something that's very doable in written form, seeing as kids that age make their own comics with the kind of intentional quirks that Dogman has. But how do you translate that same charming imperfection and perspective to a full-length animated movie? After all, there's not a lot of kids out there making those in their free time, so where do they draw the line between keeping the spirit of the books intact and making it clear they're doing it on purpose? And on top of that, how do they convey the premise without it coming off weird? In the books, it's pretty simple. At the start, George and Harold do a little prologue explaining who they are and what Dogman is for viewers who don't know. And even if the introduction wasn't there, like it isn't for later books in the series, you could still probably catch on to that premise just based on the presentation. The crooked line art and simple character designs, the way they scribble out words they don't like since they're using pen and can't erase them, the fact the buildings are so basic the only way to tell them apart is by having their names scribbled out over them. Just little comedic touches like that that help you think, oh, I see, this is supposed to look like it was made by kids. Things you just couldn't do as well in a non-written format. So that begs the question, how did they ever make a movie of Dogman? Well, I'll tell you this much, it works way better as an adaptation than Lolita ever did. So, in case you don't know what Dogman is, which I'd be kinda shocked if you didn't, considering how insanely popular it's been for about the last decade or so, like, seriously, it's kinda baffling just how big it is. The series follows a man and his dog, whose body and head, respectively, don't work good no more, so to keep either half from dying, the local doctor decides to sew dog's head onto man's body and create Dogman, crime-fighting superstar. And I mean, that description alone should tell you exactly what kind of tone and humor the books are going for. They're stories that use how innocent their meta-writers are to make jokes out of things most kids wouldn't think twice about, like the logistics of sewing a dog's head onto a human's body and everything just working out in the end. It's a very specific type of comedy that, for the most part, thankfully, the writers of the film are able to translate really well into animation. It's definitely not a perfect transition, since I guess to avoid confusion, they cut out any mention of George and Harold or Dogman's meta-origins to keep it simpler, but they're still able to have that subtly self-aware angle without the context by doing small tricks like having the doctor and nurse just pause for a second after getting their idea to let it sink in how utterly stupid what they're saying is, and I appreciate that. It's nice that they try to keep the soul while switching things up, knowing it wouldn't work as well in the film if they left it unchanged. And I could say the same thing about how it goes about its art direction, which is pretty much as close to the comic's vibe as it could get without straight up doing crackhead doodles the whole time. Dreamworks has really been making a name for themselves lately based off of how experimental and distinct the visuals of each of their films are, and Dogman is no exception to that, because this thing looks gorgeous in a way that's completely different from all their other gorgeously stylized movies. Like Last Wish went for an old-timey storybook feel, The Bad Guys had a more comic, graphic style, Wild Robot is natural like an oil painting, and now Dogman is basically the personification of everything childish and lovingly made, but just a little bit off. I think the exact term the director used was calling it high-end handmade, and yeah, that's precisely how it should be described, seeing as this really does look like if you gave George and Harold a massive budget. The designs have stayed mostly the same, the backgrounds are as wonky and vibrant as they were in the comics, and the textures, the textures are what really help to sell it. They look just like how a kid would have colored them, with straight brush strokes and smudge lines and scribbly line art. It's a style that's rooted in matching that endearing unprofessionalism of the comics while still looking good. And I honestly wouldn't change a thing about it. Okay, maybe one thing. Yeah, here we go. The nostalgia critic pointing guns for having a controversial sounding take thing, but it's not what you think. See, I'm not trying to say there's anything about this style that's bad. I just don't like a certain, very specific visual choice for how it kinda lessens a better joke. And that's how they choose to go about designing the villain Petey's secret lab. Now, in the comics, I love the joke of how his supposedly secret base has a giant-ass sign saying as much on the front of it. And like they do by pausing to emphasize certain jokes, the filmmakers choose to up the ante here by adding signs that say stuff like, "Look, it's here, but shh." And man, I want to like how they do this just as much as it works in the comic, but I'm sorry, I feel like the joke is a little too smart now. And I know, it sounds weird for me to say something is just too intelligent for its own good, but I'm always gonna find the idea funnier that George and Harold just followed the trend they do of labeling every building, not even realizing doing that for Petey's secret lab defeats the purpose, over it being such an openly self-aware joke. I get that they couldn't give it the same context, so they probably felt like they had to do it this way to make sure the joke got across, but I feel like this was an overcorrection. Although it at least works better than the spelling error nods in this, which, again, I'm sorry, but unless it's spelled out for you literally on screen to read and get it's an intentional dumb spelling mistake, having the character say serialously is cute and all, but it's more or less an inside joke for people who read the book. If you don't already know what this running gag is referencing, it might as well be gibberish, and that's maybe the one thing about how this mimics the book's childishness that doesn't work for me, their inconsistency on the language. And no, I don't mean fucking swearing, you goddamn dipshit. This is a family picture, and a children's book series. But there is a very particular way the characters speak in Dogman, especially early on, that helps define the comedy. And that's how blunt everything is. It's a trait that goes back to how kids aren't great at writing natural dialogue, and so in the same way their ideas are bluntly innocent, but sometimes logistically horrifying, their speech is super basic and kinda stiff. And that's not a negative in Dogman's case, since it knows how to use that bluntness to its advantage. One of my favorite bits is when, for a Dogman book they wrote back in first grade, there's a bunch of scenes where the comedy comes from how first graders think dumb people act. Like having a news reporter go, "Welcome to the 13 o'clock news. Our top story, Nico Bloom Bloom in my panties." Like, it's such a childishly blunt way to demonstrate why something's dumb that the intentional meta-irony wraps itself back around to being super charming and funny. The bluntness adds to what makes it great. And look, I get that they can't pull this off for a whole film. That'd be ridiculous and potentially really annoying. Not everything that works when written works when spoken. I understand that and why they didn't do it. I'm just saying it's a part of the book's identity, and it's sad they couldn't properly replicate it in the film. But that sure didn't stop them from trying. I mean, it's more like they're doing references to the books with occasional iconically stupid lines as nudges and winks, but just like the serialously bit doesn't work when it's not written out, these straight callbacks and lines don't really work when they're surrounded by more natural dialogue. It makes it seem like they're being inserted for laughs instead of, ironically, coming off naturally. And I don't know if this could have played a role in it or not, but I feel like I should mention it for the record. This is going for a decidedly younger audience than the Captain Underpants movie, and that comes through a few times across the film. Not in big ways, and there is still plenty of clever, well-written shit all over the thing, but there were also moments where I would think, okay, that was just added for the babies. And it makes sense. Captain Underpants came out in the 90s, so there was more of a focus on keeping it timeless for the fans who've been around for years, whereas Dogman is popular now, so Cue the TikTok references. You can even kind of see it in who they got to perform the theme songs. Of course, for CU, they got Weird Al, the absolute best possible choice, seeing how Al's been referenced since the first book and totally captures that same zany vibe. Meanwhile, for Dogman, they got Young Gravy, the guy who did that one rap set to a remix of the Rickroll. Like, he's not a bad pick, I guess, but I can tell this was done more for young kids who like the funny meme man than to be an actually clever bit. And while it doesn't really poke its head around in this too often, it does happen enough that I raise an eyebrow and let my monocle fall out for a second. After all, this movie is made for me, 21-year-old Captain Underpants fan watching this with notepad ready in a theater full of screaming children. I am clearly the target audience here. Speaking of Captain Underpants, though, and trust me, I'll be speaking a lot about it later in this video, just you wait, this is very blatantly done by some of the same people as that film. And so for the story, like they did with Captain Underpants, they ended up mashing a couple books together plus some original bits to hopefully make a new cohesive narrative. And does it work like it did in Captain Underpants? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that everything having to do with Petey and his clone Little Petey is fucking cinema. It's more or less an exact replica of what happens in the comics, and the comic storyline for these two is adorable, so yeah, they nail it on the head there. And no, in the sense that they try to give Dogman his own storyline in this outside of getting closer to Little Petey, and it's fine, but as far as original elements from Dreamworks go, this has gotta be one of their weakest. I definitely like the idea of Dogman not having a place in this world and feeling like he doesn't belong either as a person or a dog anymore, but it's so small in the plot that I kind of forgot about it by the time it was relevant again. And also, this was the film that really made me realize, wait a second, almost every time Dreamworks is making an adaptation and they need to lend to characters some emotional resonance, they just give them a love interest. Legit, they do it in Joseph, Peabody, Sinbad, Prince of Egypt, Captain Underpants, this. I guess I just didn't notice before because the other times, even if they were bad, they usually had something to do with the story, but this time, nah, this unnamed girl is just there so you can feel bad for Dogman that she's gone. And maybe I would've if their relationship or his feelings about it were explored more, but they aren't, so but whatever, we needed more time for the mecha Ricky Gervais fish anyway. I know I said that like I was being sarcastic, but no, I do really like Flippy as a side villain. He's fun. And so is this movie. Sure, it's got its problems that keep it from being flawless, but compared to most adaptations, it's a slam dunk, baby. And we've still got 3 more to go. Is the scope of quality here starting to sink in yet? Ha! The wild robot. More like shut up and take my money. Okay, so I've got a confession to make. I am in love with this movie, and I've been in love with it ever since the moment I saw it in theaters. Shit, I was so in love with it, I went to see it another 2 full times. And with ticket prices today, I'm still paying that off. But goddamn it was worth it, cause this movie is fucking awesome. And as I've come to learn recently, so is the book it's based on. And they're both fucking awesome in such different ways while still fundamentally being the same story with very similar themes. Do you understand how rare that is? To have a film that diverges from the source material but comes out just as good with a unique vision that still stays true to that source in the process? That's like finding a 4-leaf clover or a slime staff in Terraria. It just doesn't happen. It's not supposed to exist in this world. It's too pure. And yet there it is. Defying logic. And honestly, it's even more of a miracle this is as good as it is, considering the book it's based on just doesn't seem like the type of story Dreamworks would do. Like, I've already brought up the token girlfriend trope a lot of these have, but an even bigger trend I saw with these adaptations was that, for the most part, they've nearly always stuck to stuff that's either wacky and in your face, or old and flexible on the details, which honestly tracks with how Dreamworks films in general tend to be. They're big, they're zany, they're self-aware. It's a brand they've been building to help stand out from the crowd ever since the days of their earliest movies. And a lot of the time they're very good at it. But one thing they usually aren't very good at is subtlety. Now, that's not to say they can't be deep. Movies like Kung Fu Panda, Megamind, and How to Train Your Dragon are all super emotionally resonant and deal with dark themes. They're able to be really mature, but that's not quite the kind of subtlety I'm talking about here. Now, what I mean is that Dreamworks movies can be complex and heartbreaking and powerful and boundary pushing, but one thing they almost never are is quiet and ambient, at least for most of the movie. You know, there are scenes in lots of Dreamworks movies where they're chill or silent or calm, but that's just it, they're scenes. They last for maybe a couple minutes tops and then resume with the action as soon as they're able to. There are hardly any Dreamworks movies where for a majority of the runtime, they're focused on being chill and relaxed over big and extreme. But that's exactly what The Wild Robot by Peter Brown is all about. It's nothing like the typical zanified, high-energy kids book you'd probably expect when hearing it's a story about a stray robot trying to survive on an island after being stranded. Not that there isn't action, there's a lot of times where the main girl Roz runs into bears or disasters or almost dies trying to get away from a massive threat. She definitely has some agency in the story, especially after finding a gosling and deciding to raise it after accidentally killing its family, but even so, whenever those specific tense moments aren't happening, the whole thing just ruminates this sort of cozy, mellow vibe. Like, yeah, there are problems, and yeah, we have to deal with them, but while we're at it, we might as well take in the world and notice just how nice it is so we can share that beauty with the people around us. For sure, it's a hard life to live, and not everything's figured out, but as long as we can find solace in the people around us, we don't need to be in as big of a rush to get shit done. That's the mood the Wild Robot gave off when I was reading it, and to say DreamWorks getting that vibe down is surprising would be a massive understatement, since I don't think that I've ever seen one of their movies that's this laid back. Of course, there are a lot of what I like to call DreamWorks-isms to help it fit more with their typical stuff. You know what I mean, it's got way more one-liners, dark jokes, a cynical attitude. Hell, I'm pretty sure that half of the reason they gave the Fox guy Think such a big role was just to sneak in as many DreamWorks-isms as possible, but thankfully that never takes away from the calming atmosphere and genuine whimsy this movie has. In fact, it even kinda adds to it strangely in that, okay, it's not going for the same semi-mystical storybook fable style the books kinda are, but in this more realistic cynicism, as exaggerated for comedy as it usually is, it does also help to craft the movie's own picture of how it wants us to see nature. Like in the book, it's mostly shown as being beautiful with a dash of natural indifference that Roz has to fight back against to make its beauty shine even more. While in the film, that theme of fighting the natural order is still there, but it's more through the lens of Roz fighting a mostly cruel, indifferent world to help its beauty come through when it's the hardest to find. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know it sounds like a small change, but it makes for a world of difference for how you view those moments of pure beauty, which, by the way, speaking of, oh boy, do those moments hit hard in this. Legit, they're a pure rush of dopamine in audio-visual form, and it's all thanks to them getting that atmosphere the books have down perfectly through the animation and especially the score. Like, I don't want to downplay the animation's importance. It's gorgeous, it's vibrant, it's got all the colors and details of an oil pastel, and I love how Roz is the only one in traditional CG who gets more and more like the others as she integrates to the forest. All of that is great, and these scenes wouldn't hit as hard without it. But I would argue the music is the real star here, since the score to this film is fucking fantastic. It's grand, it's cinematic, the reliance on flutes and strings gives the whole thing this enchanting but dramatic vibe, and the best part about it all is that the movie has the restraint to let the music guide several otherwise silent scenes to let it speak way more about what the characters are feeling than words ever could. And they keep that up over the course of the whole thing. Seriously, it's one of the best uses of music I've seen from a mainstream animated movie in years. Not to mention it's also just so unlike anything else DreamWorks has ever done. Like, they've hardly ever been this sentimental before. It's almost kinda jarring, but it makes a lot more sense when you know that the director, Chris Sanders, is not only the guy behind How to Train Your Dragon and, who could forget, that one weird CGI Harrison Ford dog movie, but Lilo and Stitch, which is maybe the most laid-back Disney film of all time and instantly gave me an oh moment when I found out as much. For real, everything made sense to me the moment I realized this was the same guy. And it also helped me to get why they chose to make the story more about Roz and the Gosling Brightbill's relationship. See, in the book, their bond is still really important to everything that happens. It's not like that came out of nowhere the way it does with Think, but, well, to keep up my trend of weird comparisons to classic literature just cause it's fun for me, their original dynamic was less Poe and Mr. Ping, more Cosette and Jean Valjean. You know, it's got a big sway on the story, and it matters a lot to Roz, and it gets her to start talking to other animals to get advice for raising him, but their relationship specifically isn't always the main focus. A lot of the time, it's more about Roz befriending all the animals and becoming wild by integrating to the point they feel like she's one of them. That's the real emotional core of the story, the community she forms with all the animals. And that community obviously includes Brightbill, who's basically the reason she was able to form it in the first place, but that doesn't mean it's all about him. In fact, he doesn't really even have an arc. Yeah, I know, that's weird to think about if you've only ever watched the movie, but Brightbill didn't originally go through that many changes since, unlike in the film, by the time he could think for himself, Roz was already accepted by the forest, including including the geese. So his whole thing of being a fish out of water outcast who needs to figure out his identity and what Roz means to him never happens at all. That conflict just doesn't exist. He does have a moment as a teen where he asks Roz about his family like he did in the film, and she tells him about what happened pretty plainly, but it was never built up as a secret or something Roz was trying to hide there, so when she tells him, instead of it becoming this massive identity crisis he needs to overcome, he just sort of accepts the situation for what it is and tells Roz he still thinks she's his mom. It's got none of the same conflicting feelings or tension that were in the film, and I think that really speaks to why Sanders made all the changes he did. After all, when you look at the movies the guy has done, Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon, The Croods, what's the one thing they have in common? Daddy issues. Deep family issues. Lilo and Nani are figuring things out on their own after both their parents die. Hiccup wants to impress his dad but feels like he'll never be good enough. Eep's dad is controlling and voiced by Nicolas Cage. Every one of them is centered around small families with strained relationships who need to make up over the course of the film. And The Wild Robot doesn't have any of that. It's got a lot of characters. Most of their conflicts last 1 or 2 chapters max before Roz makes friends with them. The only long-term threat they have doesn't even show up until near the end, and it's got nothing to do with the cast's interpersonal problems since they basically don't have any. Like, I know I use Sanders as an explanation for why DreamWorks was able to make this movie happen, but theoretically on that same level, Wild Robot doesn't seem like the type of story Sanders would do either. I mean, like I said before, it's got its vibe, the tone is right up his alley, and there are familiar elements, but it's fundamentally a very different story from the sort of thing he's used to. And so, being that he's the director and writer with full creative control, I guess he decided to say, alright, fuck it, we ball, and amped up the stuff he was used to give it more of his own personal touch, turning the thing into a family drama about outcasts finding a place to belong in each other. And I don't really know how to convey that without basically formatting it like a list, since it's so smartly done and precise, so hey, in the words of the imaginary Chris Sanders I just made up in my head, fuck it, we ball. Here's how he changed the story while making everything still work out, as presented in the form of a checklist, cause I am a cheap hack fraud. Okay, so starting out, the first thing they did was make Roz more artificially chipper and dumb so she'd have a harder time connecting with the animals. Originally, she was just deadpan and could recognize them for what they were, instead of seeing them as potential customers, so you put up that wall to make interactions harder, it's easier to focus on the few guys who still decide to talk to her. The lack of a bigger sidecast for most of the movie suddenly doesn't feel weird. Secondly, like I said before, they give Fink a bigger role to show us another outcast who starts out being as indifferent as the forest, but gets changed by Roz's kindness, going from a sleazy con man who drowns children into an okay, admittedly still sleazy, but caring con man who comes to love Roz after finding a home with her and Brightbill, basically making his growth a way of foreshadowing what she does later for the whole forest. Thirdly, they give Roz 2 new opposing motivations, one to get back to her factory and one to finish her task of raising Brightbill, so as a robot, she can have a conflict of not really knowing where she belongs and needing to find it as she overrides her basic programming. A portion that actually never happened in the book since Roz's only real objective there was to survive, and she kinda just saw raising Brightbill as a part of that, so making it something that actually develops her character and gives her a progression over the course of the whole thing is a very nice addition. After that, for number 4, they help play up how Brightbill's an outcast too by 1, making it so the advice Roz has is only applicable to humans, which leads to him being a little freak dork of nature with no one else to help, and 2, by leaning more into how he's a runt who was never meant to get that far, so Roz's support hits him that much more when he learns it. Oh yeah, motherfucker, I just did a list within a list. You didn't even know how much of a hack I could be. Fifthly, they turn Brightbill migrating into a time for him, Roz, and Fink to figure out just how much they mean to each other with months spent apart, making their reunion more emotional. And 6, with all that said and done, all those switches made, they still find a way to bring it back to the community angle in the 3rd act while perfectly demonstrating how it's been changed. Or to put it another way, just look at the difference between the shelter scenes. In the book, Roz building a shelter for the animals in winter is gratifying because most of her guests are critters she's helped and befriended over the book. It's essentially the community she's made coming together through her giving them a place to all feel at home. Meanwhile, in the movie, seeing as she spent the entire film film being rejected by almost everyone, it hits totally different since she's saving them in spite of how they treated her instead of because of it. And isn't that just such a good indicator of how much the crew cared about keeping the heart of the book intact? How Sanders was able to mess with the story so much to give it a new emotional core while still making this scene fit just as well for completely new reasons? And he gave it the same ending without it feeling contradictory or unearned. God, this movie's such a good adaptation, but also so unique in its own way. I could legit keep going on like this for hours about all the little things this movie does, and there's still 2 more left? I think I'm having a stroke.
You're playing with the big boys now.
Okay, I'm good. Anyway, The Prince of Egypt is one of my favorite movies of all time. No, not DreamWorks movies, not animated movies, not even adaptation movies, just movies, period. I love this thing with all of my heart. So, for me to put it at rank number 2, that was not a very easy thing for me to do, but that's a topic for later on. Right now, we're talking about The Prince of Egypt, and well, to say the least, this isn't just a good adaptation, or even a great adaptation. It's an adaptation that's so good, it does something you rarely ever see. It's actually way, way better than the original story. Because real talk right now, I am not an anti-religious guy or anything, but to think that a film as amazing as this came out of a story like the one you find in the Bible is honestly a baby Moses winding up on Pharaoh's doorstep level miracle if I've ever seen one. Like, at the start they have a little disclaimer saying they think this is the true way that things happened, and behind the scenes they apparently went to over 600 religious figures from various faiths to make sure the thing was as theologically accurate as it could be, and, well, non-denominational, God bless him for it, but I don't know what the hell kind of incense they're smoking, because if this was even half as accurate as they say it is, then it would be just an undeniably much worse, much preachier, much shittier story than the one we got. And if you want to know who's to blame for that being the case, then just take a look up in the fucking sky. Yeah, I know it's been said by people who are way more versed in this stuff than I will ever be, but even as a tourist to this kind of commentary, there's just no getting around the fact that while Pharaoh is the guy who gets called the villain, God is 100% the real bad guy, and he is very open about it. Like, when we were kids, or at least if you were a kid like me who grew up in a Bible Belt private school, we all learned about the basics. Pharaoh kills Hebrew babies, one drifts in a basket and gets found by his wife/daughter, grows up being privileged but runs away after killing someone, God tells him to free his people as a burning bush, new Pharaoh says nah, 10 plagues, water rising, yada yada yada, everyone gets circumcised, Mazel Tov. That's the story you learn in Sunday school. But what they don't really tell you about when you're an impressionable little kid is that, well, first of all, God almost kills Moses on the way to Egypt for no reason, so his wife needs to cut off the foreskin of their kid and rub it on his feet, which is pretty weird. But also, just overall, the conflict of Moses trying to save the Hebrews and calling down the plagues when Pharaoh says no would have ended way sooner if God wasn't repeatedly hardening Pharaoh's heart so he would say no. Oh, why is God making it so Pharaoh won't let his people free sooner, you ask? Why, to show off his great power and reduce the entire country of Egypt to rubble so he could metaphorically teabag on their lesser gods. And it just goes on and on like that, page after page, verse after verse. It's nothing but, and then God hardened Pharaoh's heart again, since why not? And so God went on for 3 paragraphs about how awesome he is for doing this, and how small Pharaoh's god's dicks are, like the size of this walnut but way smaller. And guess what? Here's what his dick looks like. Boom! That's right, baby. All plagues, no stopping, no mercy. And look, to repeat what I said, I'm not trying to shit on anyone's religion here. I'm just saying that in the context of this story, God is kind of an unforgivable asshole who causes pain and suffering to not just the innocent Egyptians who didn't do shit,
As in the ones who weren't doing slavery.
but his own people purely so he can keep showing off how massive his cock is and how much you should totally worship it. And the real cherry on top of the shit sundae here is that it's all so repetitive. You know how many times God hardens Pharaoh's heart in this? 6 times. 6 fucking times. I swear, after a while, while, I thought my ADHD was making me accidentally read the same page over and over again without noticing. That's how tedious it is. So if you're confused why I'm making such a big show about this when there's a lot of stories where God's randomly a dick, like in Joseph, it's because this is one of the only stories, as far as I know, where the whole point is that God is a dick, and they desperately want you to know that. Constantly. And you know, it's really funny for me to bring this all up as a comparison to Prince of Egypt, seeing as one of the reasons I love it so much is because it's a religious story, but it doesn't feel like it's preaching to you. After all, that's the problem with most Christian media. It feels like it's trying to convert you to its side more than it's trying to tell an actually engaging narrative. And that's not an impossible thing to do either. You just need to not make it so the whole point of the story isn't if you, the audience, don't believe this guy is real, then you're basically Hitler. And that's exactly what Prince of Egypt does by outright omitting like 95% of God's moments, pretty much axing any sign that he was doing it to stroke his ego from the picture, and recontextualizing everything that happens because of it around the relationship between Moses and his new brother Ramesses, which honestly might be one of the most amazing conflicts I've ever seen in an animated film for just how complex it is. Like, here you have two estranged brothers who've always loved each other, but haven't talked in years because Moses gave up everything to find out who he is. Now, after all this time, they want things to go back to normal and let shit return to the way it was, since they obviously still love and care for each other, but they can't, since not only does Moses have orders to free the slaves, knowing how much they're suffering, but Ramesses isn't able to see it since he's so caught up in not being the weak link of the family dynasty like his father nailed into him when they were young. He wants to live up to that reputation he was always told he needed to top, and so for him, that means always looking so high up to the future, he can't see the mountain of corpses he's stepping on to reach it. It's not that he's trying to be evil per se, it's just that he hasn't learned the importance of life like Moses has by living in the desert with the Midians. So when given the chance to stop doing something he doesn't think is wrong, it only makes sense he'd stubbornly refuse Moses every time. And that's why the plagues happen in this version. Not because God hardens Pharaoh's heart, not because he wants to show off his amazing power, but because Ramesses just can't get the message and lets everything happen to hold on to his dwindling pride. Hell, they're even able to justify Passover, which, when you look at the original story, is probably one of the cruelest things God does in the Bible, killing every firstborn Egyptian child, but in the movie, feels like a punishment Ramesses brings on himself after he threatens to finish the job his father started by killing every single Hebrew child. Plus, it's also thematically fitting, seeing as Ramesses in this story has his own kid, and so in losing him, he's finally forced to feel a bit of the suffering he's unknowingly caused the Hebrews his entire life. It's just such good shit. And I haven't even mentioned how it's told through such amazing animation that's one of the few times a 2D Dreamworks film used CGI without looking like total garbage. Amazing songs by Steven Schwartz, the same guy behind Hunchback of Notre Dame, who brings his A game the entire time, and great voice performances that really capture the essence of the characters. Oh, and it was also all made up completely on the spot. Yeah, in the original story, Moses is not brothers with the pharaoh, adopted or otherwise. In fact, he doesn't even know the current pharaoh in any tangible way, and he was never a prince. And historically speaking, Ramesses II, the real pharaoh the character's based on, probably wasn't even born until over 100 years after the Exodus. It was all a total fabrication by the people at Dreamworks. And so I guess that must lead to the question, how can it be a great adaptation if it changes so much from the original source? And my answer to that is pretty simple. Because at its core, it's still functionally the same story, but every change it makes is for the better. Every alteration is a positive one. It's pretty much the animation equivalent of Starship Troopers in the sense that there's not a single thing this movie alters without it ultimately being for the best. And in my opinion, if an adaptation makes changes that improve the work, then there's almost nothing else you could ask it to do. Keyword being almost. Tra-la-la! Alright, I get how bizarre it must feel for me to go from a film that's quite literally biblical in scope to one that's based on a series of chapter books about a bald guy fighting crime in his underwear, but if I could just take a moment to try and defend myself. This might be the best adaptation, No, that's the end of the sentence. It might be the best adaptation of anything that I've ever seen. And trust me, I've seen a lot of adaptations. Good and bad, loose and strict, down to the last detail and in name only. And this may be one of the best that I've ever seen. At least so far in my admittedly short life. You know, I'm only 21, I've got plenty of time to top it, but goddamn, that one's gonna be hard to beat. And to me saying that, you might be wondering, but Braxton, what makes this a better adaptation than The Prince of Egypt, one of your favorite movies of all time? And well, honestly, it just comes down to one main factor, seeing as surprisingly, as far as adaptations go, these two have a weirdly large amount in common. Both are based on well-known books that have sold tens of millions of copies, both make tons of changes for the better and challenge the worldviews of their sources, both work very well on their own as self-contained things, but when you come down to it and really analyze what makes these movies work, there's one big thing CU has that puts it above for me as an adaptation, and that's that while The Prince of Egypt is a great movie in spite of its source, Captain Underpants is great because while it does improve on what the books were going for, and even kinda deconstructs them a bit, it still embraces everything about what its source represents, and that's the ability to see things through a kid's perspective. Like, yeah, as an adult reading the old books, I can see that George and Harold are kinda assholes, that the teachers being these two-dimensional supervillains who love getting them in trouble isn't very realistic, that there are some real serious issues with the way things are presented, and it's good the film chooses to fix those problems when it can. But even in those problems, you really can't deny that, if nothing else, these books understand what kids like and how they think. Since to kids like George and Harold, the thought of them being assholes for doing pranks that hurt people doesn't even cross their minds. The thought that their teachers could be anything less than evil for confiscating their comics is impossible. And the thought that anything matters besides making each other laugh is stupid. Now, I'm not saying that means those complaints about the book are invalid, there's a good reason they got changed, but the fact they were presented that way to begin with does speak to a pure essence of childish thinking that reminds me of a time when I used to be exactly the same, just like we all were. And really, I feel like that's the sensation the film is trying to capture. It wants to remind you of what being a kid is like, whether it's the crushing possibility of you and your friend being separated by classrooms, the joy of a Saturday being ruined by some dumbass mandatory school thing, the pure fucking ecstasy of hanging out with your friends and enjoying each other's company, just all the little things that made life feel so big despite us as adults not even giving those things a second thought, which I think is a very apt theme for this movie to cover given how, at this point, Captain Underpants is an over 25-year-old franchise. It's a series that's been going strong since 1997, and so, as a result, it should pretty much go without saying that a lot of this movie's audience is gonna be sad, nostalgic adults like me looking back on something they used to love as kids. Something that when they were young gave them a taste of everything a kid could ever want in book form. Laughs, action, thrills, creativity, motherfucking flip-o-rama. Like when you were a kid, Captain Underpants was there to remind you why being a kid was so much fun. So now that you're a sad adult who hasn't been reminded of that in a long time, the film is here to do the same. And bitch, this time, they've got sock puppets. So you know they're dead serious. But for real though, the best way to describe this film is that it's a celebration of not only childhood itself, but the fun that comes with being childish. And it's able to pull that off while also straying from the book's perspective through making one little change that opens the door for nuance. The perspective of the books is now purely the perception of George and Harold, meaning that now, while the principal, Mr. Krupp, still feels like a comical villain, and they're able to make him feel like one too by turning him into this fun-hating dictator, actually giving George and Harold a reason to do their pranks outside of making each other laugh, he's still got a very sad life outside of school and a human side we can relate to. Granted, the movie's way of expressing he has a human side is the tried and true Dreamworks method of giving him a love interest in a lunch lady he's too chicken shit to ask out, which could have easily been eye-roll worthy if done badly, but thankfully, well, just look at her. She's adorkable. You tell me anyone wants to be with her, they have my undying sympathy and respect. So yeah, this does a good job at humanizing Krupp and making him more understandable while still keeping him the over-the-top fuck-ass villain he ultimately is. And the same can be said for George and Harold, who have just the most wholesome friendship that's so well characterized over the movie, but all you really need is just one scene. Like wow, that montage of them bouncing ideas off each other and having fun making comics is maybe one of the most instantly relatable moments I've seen in forever. It's almost night night and day from how they initially were in the books, and the way the movie just revels in all the fun that they're having is absolutely infectious. You know, I would be lying if I said this movie wasn't dumb, because it is. It's got two kids hypnotizing their principal with a ring they found in a cereal box. That hypnotized principal then goes on to fight a giant mutated toilet. The main villain's name is Professor P.P. Diarrheenstein Poopy Pants Esquire, and he wants to destroy humor so people will stop laughing at his stupid name. This is not a film that you should take seriously, and that's okay, since the film doesn't treat itself seriously either. As a matter of fact, it treats itself like it's the stupidest thing on Earth, and that's what makes it great. Like, only in Captain Underpants could they unironically have the "Oh Yeah" song from Ferris Bueller complete with and have it fit perfectly, since that's the exact kind of thing you'd expect it to do. Cause this doesn't care about what you think of it. It doesn't care if you call it lowbrow or dumb or immature. All it cares about is telling a genuine story with heart and laughs, and yes, a freaky bald dude in his underwear saving the world. Really, its mentality as a film is just like George and Harold's mentality when making comics. And if there's a bigger compliment I could give an adaptation than that, then I don't know what it is. And so with that, I've finally finished my ranking of every Dreamworks adaptation that there is. Do you agree with my ranking? Do you think I'm full of shit? Are you feeling ripped off that I didn't somehow rank all 4 Shrek movies in relation to the 50-page picture book that it was based on? Feel free to tell me in the comments section. I'll be sure not to read it. With that being said, I've been Just Stop and... God, I'm tired. I'm going to bed. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.